Hello, namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. The Israel-Gaza war has spilled over to the Red Sea. Houthis are attacking ships. Exports, including oil shipments, are becoming costlier. 10 countries have joined hands to form a force to counter these attacks. Tonight, we'll tell you about this Red Sea coalition. Meanwhile, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, has called India a star performer in the global economy. We'll tell you about the wins and the challenges ahead. In Bangladesh, pre-election violence continues to spiral. This time, a passenger train has been set on fire. In China, the worst earthquake in almost a decade kills more than 100 people. In India, all the highlights from the IPL auction. Yet another African nation is expelling the UN peacekeeping force, and why these missions are increasingly unpopular. Why Apple's $17 billion smartwatch business is in crisis. How the EU wasted vaccines worth over $4 billion. And a story that you must watch before getting influenced by influencers. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. India's parliament suspends 141 lawmakers. 95 have been suspended from the Lok Sabha, that's the lower house. 46 from the Rajya Sabha, the upper house. This includes over half of all opposition MPs. These lawmakers were suspended for disrupting House proceedings. The White House warns that Ukraine aid will run out at the end of this month. The US says it has enough funding for just another aid package. Any more aid after that will have to be approved by the Congress. Google will pay $700 million to settle antitrust charges over Play Store. The company has been accused of overcharging consumers and stifling competition, but Google rejects all charges of wrongdoing. ChatGPT maker OpenAI releases new guidelines to tackle the threat of harmful artificial intelligence. The company says it will deploy new technology only if it is safe. The new rules also give the board a veto power on risky tech. A volcano erupts in Iceland after weeks of earthquakes and tremors. This is the fourth eruption in the area since 2021 and the largest so far. The town near the volcano has already been evacuated. Flight risks are unlikely for now. And Marvel drops Jonathan Majors after domestic assault conviction. The Emmy-nominated actor was convicted of assaulting his ex-girlfriend. It's not clear if Marvel will replace him or just write his character out of the movies.
The lifeblood of the rules-based international order is actually seawater.
It's a red alert in the Red Sea. Drone attacks, cruise missiles, hijackings. We've seen it all in the last few weeks. And one group did all this damage. The Houthi rebels of Yemen, they single-handedly terrorized the Red Sea. But now there is pushback. 10 nations have signed up for a multinational coalition. Its job to defend ships in the Red Sea. We don't know how this coalition will operate, but usually such forces have the same strategy. More joint patrols, more air support, and escorts for commercial vessels. Meaning warships will accompany cargo ships. The coalition was announced by Pentagon Chief Lloyd Austin. He is in West Asia right now for talks.
All countries have the right to move freely and lawfully in international waters. But that foundational global right is under new threat today from the totally unacceptable attacks on merchant vessels by the Houthis in Yemen. So this morning, we've launched Operation Prosperity Guardian under the umbrella of Combined Maritime Forces and under the leadership of Task Force 153.
Operation Prosperity Guardian, that's what they're calling it. And who are these 10-member nations? The US, Britain, Spain, Seychelles, Norway, the Netherlands, Italy, France, Canada, and Bahrain. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why just one member from West Asia? Reports say the big Gulf states are worried about the optics. Just think about it. Who are the Houthis fighting for? They say they're fighting for Palestine. And who do Arab states support? Again, Palestine. So they can't be seen as hurting Palestine and backing Israel, hence the reluctance to join this force. Having said that, Arab states are involved behind the scenes. Some of them could join eventually. So it's a pretty elaborate plan, which raises the question, why? Why do they need this? Just how bad is the Red Sea situation? Over the weekend, the Houthis fired 15 drones. All of them were shot down by US and UK warships. On Monday, they struck again. 2 commercial ships were targeted. One of them was called Swan Atlantic. It was hit by a Houthi drone and a ballistic missile. The ship sent out a distress call. It was assisted by a US warship late on Monday. Now, here's the problem. Not all of these ships are heading to Israel. Some of them are heading to European ports. But the Houthis don't care. They're picking targets at random. And the result is this. Major shipping companies are avoiding the Red Sea. Just look at this list. MSC, the world's largest shipping group. Maersk, the second largest. Hapag-Lloyd, the German company. Euronav, a Belgian tanker firm. Evergreen from Taiwan. Frontline, based in Norway. And HMM, a Korean shipping firm. So it's a pretty diverse list. The big, the small, the European, the Asian, all of them have stopped using the Red Sea. So how are they transporting goods? Via the alternate route. Assume that you're sailing from the Indian Ocean to Europe. Now you have 2 maritime options. The first is the Suez Canal. It's the same route that passes through the Red Sea. The second is this one. You have to go all the way around Africa, meaning more fuel, more time, more money. The voyage can take 10 days extra, which is why companies and governments are spooked. Take India, for example. This Red Sea problem affects us in 2 ways. One, it makes our exports more expensive. Some reports say by 30 to 40%. And more expensive equals less competitive. Secondly, our oil bill. The Red Sea tensions have spooked the oil market. Some companies have stopped using this route, like BP, the British oil giant. As a result, crude oil prices have increased. They were up almost 3% on Monday. It tells you how important the Red Sea is. It carries 12% of all maritime trade and 30% of all containers. We're talking about close to $1 trillion here. What happens if that trade is disrupted? Things we import will become more expensive, things like oil, gold, and gadgets. In simple words, higher inflation. The question is, can this new coalition of 10 countries prevent that? Can it deter the Houthis? Well, they've released a response. Listen to what they've said. We have capabilities to sink your fleet, your submarines, your warships. The Red Sea will be your graveyard. This is what the Houthis have said. It does not sound like a de-escalation at all. So the Houthis will fight on, they say. Even the coalition cannot stop that. You see, the Houthis shoot and scoot. They don't stay around for a prolonged battle. Plus, their drones are hard to intercept. You can't be everywhere at once. Hundreds of ships pass through the Red Sea. How many of them will you escort or provide air cover to? It's simply not a sustainable strategy. So what is? What is a sustainable strategy? Well, the US is taking the lead now, and they have 3 options. One is to strike back at the Houthis. For some reason, Joe Biden seems reluctant to do that. The Pentagon chief was asked about why the US is not launching counter strikes. Listen to his response.
Why hasn't the US struck back or conducted a counterstrike like it has against similar Iranian-backed militants in Iraq and Syria?
These attacks are reckless, dangerous, and they violate international law. And so we're taking action to build an international coalition to address this threat. And I would remind you that this is not just a U.S. issue. This is an international problem, and it deserves an international response.
He sidestepped the question. The second option is to ask for Iran's help. You see, Tehran funds and arms the Houthis, so the assumption is that they will listen to Iran. Reports say Biden has even turned to China. He's asking Xi Jinping to put in a good word. And finally, the third option, the sure shot one, end the war in Gaza. Joe Biden has the power to force Israel to stop. 153 countries want him to do it. He'll have a chance tonight at the United Nations Security Council. Let's see if he takes it. All this Red Sea drama is bad for the global economy. There's talk of slowdown in 2024, maybe even a recession. But amid this gloom, there is a bright spot, and that's India. And we are not the ones saying this. The IMF is, the International Monetary Fund. They've released the annual assessment of India's economic performance, sort of like a report card. And three things stand out here, three big headlines. Number one, the IMF has called India a star performer, one of the fastest growing economies in the world. Number two, India's GDP will grow by 6.3%. That's the current financial year. 6.3% growth. And number three, India will make up 16% of global economic growth. Together with China, it will be the engine of the world economy. How did that happen? How did India avoid the global slowdown? Well, the IMF has mentioned a few reasons, like the digitization push, the large population, and also the strong government infrastructure program. And that last one is very important. India has set aside a lot of money for this, around $120 billion. It will be used to expand India's infrastructure. We're talking about roads, railways, hospitals. In fact, infrastructure spending is set to double. Between 2017 and 2023, it was around 70 lakh crore rupees. But in the next 5 years, it will reach 143 lakh crores. That's how many projects are lined up. So India is splurging on infra, and that is driving growth. What about other indicators like inflation, employment, and deficit? The IMF says all good. In July, India's inflation was at 7.4%. It was hurting most households. But by September, it was down to 5%. In October, it came down to 4.8%. So the IMF says inflation is largely under control. It's not perfect, but it's okay. And one reason for that is geopolitics. Unlike Western countries, India did not abandon Russian oil. New Delhi kept buying at a discount. Even the IMF is now talking about it. They've called it proactive diversification of critical oil imports. Whatever floats their boat. I know all this sounds perfect. So where are the challenges? The IMF has listed three major challenges. First, global headwinds. Most experts say the world will slow down in 2024, and it doesn't matter who you are or where you are. When the world slows, you slow. There'll be lesser demand for exports. Investments will reduce, and so will consumer spending. The second challenge is India's massive population. Yes, it's an advantage on paper, but you need to invest in this population. Only a healthy and educated population can help you. So the IMF has suggestions, like encouraging more women to work, reforming the labor market, and investing in health. If India does these things, growth will increase even more. And finally, the third challenge, weather shocks. When you have 1.4 billion people, food becomes a top priority. And for food, you need agriculture. And for agriculture, you need predictable weather, not shocks. And that's a clear worry. Just look at India's sugar output. It's projected to fall by 12% this year and by more than 8% next year. Fall. Why is that? Because the rains have not been enough. If these numbers hold, India may have to import sugar in 2024. The last time we did that was in 2017, around 7 years ago. Plus, India supplies around 12% of the global sugar trade. So if India bans exports, prices will rise. Not just here, but all over the world. And it won't be limited to sugar. It is not limited to sugar. India has already banned wheat and rice exports. It's an issue that will persist next year as well. But by and large, things are looking good. The IMF is pretty happy with India's report card. They did have one complaint, though, on exchange control, basically how India manages its currency. The IMF says the Reserve Bank of India is getting too involved. How? By selling dollars in the market, by propping up the rupee. But the RBI says that is not the case. It has accused the IMF of cherry-picking data. The IMF, though, seems to have made up its mind. It has reclassified India's exchange regime. It was floating until October, but now it has been changed to stabilized arrangement. I guess no report card is perfect. Turning our attention to Bangladesh now, the country is heading to polls on the 7th of January. That's in less than 3 weeks from now. The results are a foregone conclusion. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina is set to win her 4th straight term in office. But the mood in her camp is hardly celebratory, given that her country is mired in violence. Yesterday, a train was set on fire. 4 people died, including a mother and her child. It was an express train on its way to the capital Dhaka, packed with passengers. Around 5 a.m., some of them noticed flames. They raised an alarm. The train was stopped. Firefighting units were mobilized, but by the time they reached there, 3 compartments were burnt. As the news spread, so did speculation. It was being called a case of arson. And now Bangladesh's railway minister has confirmed it. He has blamed the BNP for it. That's the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, BNP. It is the country's main opposition party. The railway minister says BNP protesters set this train on fire. They've been protesting for weeks now, and the protests have been violent. Since October, we've seen buses being set on fire and vehicles damaged. Clashes between protesters and the police. At least 6 people have lost their lives. Just this morning, 2 buses were set on fire in Dhaka. So the situation is serious. And who is to blame for this? The government says it is the opposition, perpetrating violence in the name of anti-government protest. And what does the opposition say? They've rejected all charges of arson and sabotage. They're also boycotting the election.
I believe about the January 7th polls is that people will boycott it. They won't go to cast their votes. BNP is already out of this farcical poll. Also, people will align with the BNP boycotting this election.
The government keeps saying that BNP went into hibernation. We have not. Today is proof of that. Our grassroots have come out on the streets. We will kick out this government onto the streets.
Bangladesh has a multi-party system, but there are only 2 parties that matter. Sheikh Hasina's Awami League and Khaleda Zia's BNP, Bangladesh Nationalist Party. Now, the country got independence in 1971, and since then, these 2 parties have held power alternatively. But things changed in 2009. That's when Sheikh Hasina's Awami League returned to power. That's also when the caretaker system was abolished by an order of the Supreme Court. Under the system, the ruling party had to leave office before an election. A caretaker government would take charge and oversee the election. This was meant to ensure that the vote is free and fair. But the caretaker overstayed its mandate, and in 2009, this practice was scrapped. The next 2 elections were held under the Hasina administration, and the BNP had a problem with that. In 2014, they boycotted the election. The Awami League won unchallenged. In 2019, the BNP decided to contest, but the Awami League won again, this time with a thumping majority. Which brings us to the next election in 2024. The BNP has decided to boycott the polls again. They're protesting. There are nationwide strikes, transportation blockades and violence like what we saw today. Many of these protesters / rioters / opposition leaders have been put behind bars. Western agencies have condemned this. Western governments have criticized Dhaka. The US has even been accused of meddling in the election. There was a pushback from Sheikh Hasina. But this week, she's made a concession. The Awami League has offered a seat-sharing agreement with the Jatiya Party, arguably the 3rd largest party in Bangladesh. The Awami League is accommodating them by giving up 26 seats, 26 out of a total of 300 seats. The Awami League will not contest on these 26 seats, so the Jatiya Party is most likely going to win them. 6 more seats have been left for a 14-party alliance. The idea is to get more players to contest, to make it look like a real election. But the biggest opposition player, the BNP, remains defiant. They want Sheikh Hasina to step down, and they've chosen violence and arson to make that point. Away from the politics now, Dubai hosted the Indian Premier League auctions. IPL auctions. It's a high-stakes affair. Most of us only catch the action on the ground, but this is a secret sauce, the backroom work that makes IPL champions. Let's talk numbers first. All 10 IPL teams took part in the auctions. 333 players had been shortlisted. Out of them, 38 were sold in Dubai. And the rest, they went unsold. Now, the auction works exactly as it sounds. Every player has a base price, say 50 lakh rupees or 2 crore rupees. Every team can then bid for the player they want, and the highest bid wins. This year, we saw some really high bids. Australian pacer Mitchell Starc was number one. Guess how much he went for? Almost $3 million. That's around 24 crore Indian rupees. It's the highest bid in IPL history, 24 crore rupees. Starc will now play for the Kolkata Knight Riders. Another huge bid was Pat Cummins, Australia's captain. He got $2.5 million, which is around 20 crore Indian rupees. Both Cummins and Starc won the World Cup in India. Weeks later, they get massive contracts. Cricket fans have done some calculation. They've broken down Mitchell Starc's salary. It's around 7.3 lakh rupees per ball. So naturally, the internet had to make memes. Take a look at some of them.
छोटो मेकअप चाहिए छुट्टा नहीं है अरे ये तेरी टेप पे टेप ले 1000 रुपए टेप
Even the franchisees joined in, like Rajasthan Royals. They kept pushing memes throughout the auction. Look at this now. How about that? Everyone's having fun. But beyond the fun, there is a story here, that of the IPL. The previous auction record was 18.5 crore rupees. Today it was shattered twice. And the new record is 33% higher. What does that tell you? That teams are more confident, they're spending more because the league is also growing. This month, a new report was published. It looked at the brand value of the IPL. That's around $10.7 billion. IPL's brand value, $10.7 billion, 28% more than last year and 433% more than 2008 when it was started. That's meteoric growth. But what explains it? As always, the backbone of Indian cricket is the fans. The 2023 IPL recorded almost 1 billion viewers, 500 million on television, 450 million on digital. The teams have achieved cult status, like Mumbai Indians, which is worth $87 million, or Chennai Super Kings, which is worth $80 million. So simply put, the IPL is top dog. Most teams clear their schedule during the IPL months, like South Africa, New Zealand, West Indies. All their players will be available for the IPL. No national duties, no domestic cricket. They will be focused on the IPL, which tells you how important this league is. It's also expanding its influence abroad. Many IPL teams have bought franchisees abroad. 3 of them own teams in the UAE, the UAE League. 6 of them are involved in the South Africa League, while 2 have teams in the Caribbean League. So it's not a tournament anymore. It's a wide network of cricket, business and soft power. And you can't deny that last part, soft power. The IPL is reinventing cricket in many ways. They have introduced new rules. They've innovated with technology and, of course, marketed the game well. Cricket purists will say it's all unnecessary, but the fact is you must adapt to survive, and the IPL is helping cricket do that. Adapt to the times. The question is, what next? Where does this growth end? A good idea is to look at football. It's arguably the most popular game in the world, and football clubs are worth a lot more. Real Madrid, for example, is worth $6 billion. That's 60% of the IPL's total value. So sky is the limit for IPL and cricket. Every auction, the bids will keep getting bigger, the spending will surge, and so will the broadcasting deals. Yes, it's a cash cow for India, but as these memes and conversations show, It's also an obsession. And now let's turn our attention to China. At about midnight last night, the country saw its deadliest earthquake in almost a decade. A 6.2 magnitude earthquake hit China's Gansu province. More than 120 people have died, more than 700 are injured. Thousands of rescue workers are scrambling to find survivors. They're facing aftershocks, landslides, and a bitter cold wave. Below freezing temperatures have shortened the rescue window. Our next report has the details.
At just a minute to midnight on December 18th, disaster struck China.
At 11:59 on December 18th, 2023, a 6.2 magnitude earthquake occurred in Linxia. The depth of the earthquake was 10 kilometers.
The affected region is in China's Gansu province, home to about 260,000 people. Many were already asleep when disaster struck.
As of 7:50 on December 19th, the earthquake has killed 105 people.
That was the report from Gansu this morning. The nearby Qinghai province has seen over a dozen casualties as well.
As of 12 noon on December 19th, 9 townships in the southern part of our county suffered varying degrees of disaster and damage, with a total of 179 people wounded and killed, including 13 deaths, 38 serious injuries, 128 minor injuries. 20 people are missing.
Hundreds of people have been injured. Many are still trapped beneath the debris. Thousands of rescue workers have been dispatched to the affected areas. The Chinese military and local police forces are also involved in the rescue operations. They've apparently been given orders by the Chinese top brass to speed up the rescue efforts. But it looks like a difficult task due to the bitter cold. Temperatures in the earthquake-affected areas hit minus 13 degrees Celsius today. They will lower the chances of pulling out survivors from beneath the debris. There's usually a golden 72-hour window after every earthquake. That's the time when the most lives can still be saved. But the cold in China will likely shorten that window, which is why it is imperative to get more help to the region and fast. Thousands of homes have been leveled. Many collapsed because of the sheer force of the earthquake. Others have been destroyed by the landslides that followed. Electricity and communication lines have been knocked out by the disaster. Many Gansu and Qinghai residents had to flee their homes last night. They spent the night in makeshift shelters or even out in the open. This is not sustainable. The people need help to withstand these dire conditions. Beijing has begun disbursing disaster relief funds. About $28 million have been allocated to Gansu and Qinghai, but more will likely be required. This isn't the first earthquake to hit the region. The Gansu province is located at the edge of the Tibetan plateau. Qinghai is part of that plateau. It is a seismically active zone. Earthquakes are common. A long-term solution like earthquake-proof construction is the only answer. If not, disaster may strike the area again in the future.
Now let's turn our focus to Africa, specifically the Democratic Republic of Congo, or the DRC. The country goes to polls tomorrow, and a new security development is likely to sound the election bugle: the exit of a UN peacekeeping force. It's been around since 2010, stationed in the DRC, but now this force is leaving. And this is an election issue. People are celebrating the end of this peacekeeping mission. Why? Because the mission did not really bring any peace. Look at the DRC. It's been plagued by conflict for years, especially in the east. They see violent clashes between armed groups. The United Nations mission should have helped, but it did not. In fact, people here see the peacekeepers as part of the problem. Many have been caught in sexual abuse scandals and repatriated to their home nations, but not brought to justice. And this story is not unique to the DRC. It's a pattern that follows UN peacekeeping missions, which is why they're becoming so unpopular. And that's what we want to discuss tonight: why these missions increasingly fail to bring peace, but only get bad press. You see, the United Nations does not have a standing army. But when there's a conflict, they're expected to maintain peace. So they ask member nations to send soldiers, sort of like volunteer troops. They come together to create a force, and this is what we call a UN peacekeeping force. It has soldiers from all over the world. As of September, Bangladesh had contributed the highest number of troops, almost 7,000, followed by Nepal, India, Rwanda, and Pakistan. In fact, South Asians form a bulk of the UN peacekeeping forces. And where are they stationed? Again, all over the world. The mission in the DRC is winding up. It's the second mission in Africa to leave. The first was in Mali. It was ended ahead of its time by the host nation in Mali. The mission began in 2013. The government says it made no progress in a decade, so they were asked to leave. Apart from Mali and the DRC, there are 4 peacekeeping missions in Africa, 4 others in West Asia, 1 each in Lebanon and Cyprus, and 2 in territories technically occupied by Israel. Then you have a force in Kosovo, also in India and Pakistan, to observe a ceasefire in Kashmir. That's a total of 12 active UN peacekeeping missions. With Mali and DRC wrapping up, the number will come down to 10. Which brings us to the next question. Why do they face so much backlash? A, because they're seen as ineffective, and B, they're accused of excesses and sexual abuse. And even when found guilty, they often go unpunished. At the risk of generalization, this is the broad trend. Such cases have been reported in Haiti, the Central African Republic, and Kosovo. So if this is so rampant, why doesn't the UN fix it? Why can't peacekeepers be effective, swift, and why can't they leave without indulging in crimes? Because their force has a structural problem. Such peace missions are dependent on donations for both troops and overall funding. They depend on the generosity of others. They're usually short of funds, which slows them down. They also enjoy certain immunities and lack of oversight. The United Nations cannot punish these lawbreakers. When these peacekeepers become lawbreakers, the UN cannot punish them. So they're sent back to their home countries. And the home nations usually just give the soldiers a slap on the wrist and stop them from participating in UN missions again, which is not enough of a deterrent. So some peacekeepers indulge in crime. And that's what makes their missions increasingly unpopular. That is not to say that all of these missions have been useless or unsuccessful. These are supposed to be neutral forces deployed in tense zones. And research shows that in some cases their mere presence helps. It has led to less civilian casualties during conflict. Of course, they're not perfect by any means, but not completely useless either. A lot like the United Nations, you could say. The UN peacekeeping missions, like the United Nations, needs urgent reform, better funding. The soldiers need to face consequences for any wrongdoing, and they need to be given support even if their host nations turn against them for political reasons. If reform does take place, then these UN missions may finally be able to pull their weight. Until then, they will remain paper tigers. For our next story, let me ask you two questions. Are you living in the United States and do you want the latest Apple Watch? I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but as of today, starting today, you cannot buy the latest Apple Series 9 watch in the United States. Why? Because of a patent dispute. It's over a feature that measures blood oxygen. The company that patented it has sued Apple. They've accused Apple of stealing their technology. And Apple has lost that ruling. So now they're pulling the watches. They're pulling them off the US market. In 2023, Apple's smartwatches account for $17 billion in sales. It's a sizable chunk of their business. How will this ban affect it? How will Apple save its $17 billion business? Here's our next report.
It's holiday season. And what do you need most for holidays? A gift. For many in the US, it's Apple products. The holiday period is a crucial time for the company. It accounts for almost 30% of its sales. But this year, it may not be so high. The reason for this is an Apple Watch ban. Apple has halted the sale of its Series 9 and Ultra 2 smartwatches in the US. The reason is a patent dispute. The dispute is over a new feature, a feature that allows Apple Watches to measure blood oxygen levels. Measuring blood oxygen became crucial during the pandemic, so Apple thought, why not add it to the watch? Easier availability, more demand. It was supposed to be a profitable move. But instead, they ended up violating patent rights of the medical technology company Masimo. At the center of this conflict is a technology called pulse oximetry. It uses an optical sensor to detect blood flow. Masimo accused Apple of poaching its employees, stealing its pulse oximetry technology, and then adding it as a feature to the Apple Watch. So, Masimo sued Apple. They dragged the company to the US International Trade Commission. In October, the commission ruled in Masimo's favor. It said that Apple violated Masimo patents. So, it must halt sales of infringing devices. Masimo has since hailed the ban. Meanwhile, Apple plans to appeal the decision. It says the verdict must be reversed. The ban order is up for a presidential review. The deadline is the 25th of December. The White House has declined to comment. But no US president has vetoed an International Trade Commission ruling since 2013. So this time seems highly unlikely too. Will this affect Apple's business, especially in the holiday season? Apple makes up a quarter of the global smartwatch market. The Series 9 and Ultra 2 series contribute significantly to that. In fact, in 2023, Apple Watch alone made $17 billion. Apple's wearable and accessories business made around $40 billion. The sales ban could also affect older models. The oxygen feature was first introduced in Apple Watch Series 6. We are currently at Series 9. So there is no way to know if the ban will be more extensive. For now, the Series 9 and Ultra 2 watches will be removed from Apple stores in the US. But customers who bought these watches can keep them. Plus, their sales can continue outside America. So not very much will be affected. But this Apple saga just indicates one thing. Even the world's most valuable company must abide by the law.
Now let's talk about another waste of billions. A new report has come out. It looks at the European Union and their purchase and waste of Wuhan virus vaccines. Listen carefully to what it says. The EU has destroyed vaccines worth over $4.3 billion. That's a billion with a B. Vaccines worth $4.3 billion. That's almost 215 million doses in the dustbin. And this vaccine waste has been going on for years. It started at the peak of the pandemic when the world really needed vaccines. Rich countries in Europe and elsewhere began hoarding, only to throw them away. What's worse, these figures are an undercount. That's what the report says. Because many EU nations like France, Hungary and Poland have not even released official figures. So this is a conservative estimate. And by a conservative estimate, the EU destroyed vaccines worth some $4.3 billion. It's a stark reminder of inequality in our world, where the rich take more than their fair share of life-saving vaccines, and when they are done, They line their landfills with them. Let's play the devil's advocate for a bit. Say when the pandemic was raging, European countries only wanted to protect their citizens and perhaps they should be forgiven for their actions. It is brutal, but maybe you could look past that. What's unforgivable is that this has continued. Even up till this year, as recently as this month, December 2023, while the world is putting the Wuhan virus behind it, Europe is still buying and burying excess vaccines. It also makes you wonder, who are the people taking these decisions? What is their strategy? Is there no better way to offload excess vaccines, even in 2023? There has to be some way for Europe to send vaccines to poorer nations. The EU reportedly bought 1.5 billion doses of Wuhan virus vaccine. This is since the pandemic began, 1.5 billion doses. That's more than 3 doses per citizen. But they were not evenly distributed. Some countries took far more than necessary and then ended up discarding millions. Among the worst of the lot is Germany. It has wasted 83 million vaccine doses. That's almost 1 wasted dose per German citizen. But the EU's worst offender would be Estonia. They've discarded about 1.5 million vaccine doses. That's about 1.1 doses destroyed per Estonian citizen. They could have been donated. And apparently they did try, but only the ones that were about to expire. This is what the World Health Organization said in 2021. And it wouldn't have helped the recipient countries because the remaining shelf life of these doses was so short, it wouldn't have reached people in time. So the donations would have been just for show. And then there were legal issues. The EU faced problems while trying to donate vaccines. Apparently, some vaccine manufacturers had inserted a clause. You couldn't donate without the manufacturer's consent, which makes it the unholy alliance of big pharma and rich nations. One looks like a set of greedy monsters looking to profiteer from human suffering, and the other is so entitled it couldn't care less for the rest of the world. This entire episode highlights European hypocrisy. They're happy to lecture and preach to other nations, but during a real humanitarian crisis, they will always put themselves first. Our next story comes from the Vatican. Pope Francis has allowed priests to bless same-sex couples. This is the most significant advance for LGBTQ Catholics so far. It's a big shift for the queer community. You see, the Vatican has long said it could not bless same-sex couples. Doing so would undermine the church doctrine, which believes that marriage is only between a man and a woman. This new rule does not disagree either, though. It does not consider the blessing a marriage sacrament. It simply allows priests to bless relationships still considered sinful. This new rule has invited mixed reactions. The question is, does this make the church more pastoral? Our next report tells you.
The Vatican has announced a landmark ruling. Pope Francis has formally allowed Catholic priests to bless same-sex couples. He said, priests should not prevent or prohibit the church's closeness to people in every situation in which they might seek God's help through a simple blessing. This is good news, but such blessings should not offer the impression of a marriage. According to the church, marriage is still a union of a man and a woman. That does not change. And the blessing does not mean that a same-sex union is being approved of, which is why the blessings can be given on a case-by-case basis. They can be imparted during a meeting with a priest, a visit to the shrine, during a pilgrimage, or as a prayer recited in a group. This ruling has invited mixed reactions from the world over. Some are unhappy.
I think the Pope is on the wrong side.
Others are looking at the caveats attached to this move. For them, it is a disappointment.
This is not the acknowledgement of marriages, which I hope one day the Catholic Church progresses in that sense.
But for the rest, this is a strong message of inclusivity.
It's really the first time that there's been any sort of opening to blessing same-sex couples, so it's a big deal.
This is a step so that this Catholic community in the world, who are millions, have a less discriminatory treatment and a more inclusive treatment in favor of people of sexual diversity.
In the past few decades, Christianity has taken steps to become more inclusive. Christian denominations have allowed marriages of same-sex couples. They have ordained openly gay clergy. But the debates have only persisted, and the Roman Catholic Church has long been seen as the least likely to change. But this year, there has been a burst of activity on the LGBTQ front. In October, the Pope allowed transgender people to be baptized. He also suggested the possibility of blessing gay unions, reversing the 2021 Vatican ruling of God cannot bless sin. Now, the new ruling is clearly a big jump forward, and the most definitive so far.
This is an important step forward and also a tool to work against discrimination and violence that exists in many countries towards our families.
It reflects the vision of Pope Francis to be more pastoral and less rigid. And it is clearly a sign that a hardline stance on LGBTQ issues is not acceptable anymore.
It was the month of August this year in the American state of Utah. A 12-year-old child climbed out of the window of a house. He was malnourished. He had deep lacerations. But the boy ran to a neighbor, asking them to call the police because he was being held captive along with his sister. Eventually, the cops arrived. The siblings were taken to hospital. And soon after that, these two women were arrested. On the right is Ruby Franke, mother of the children who were held captive. Ironically, she's also a parenting influencer. She had a YouTube channel with millions of followers. And with her is her former business partner, Jody Hildebrandt, a counselor and life coach. It was her house where the children were being held. The boy had been tied up with ropes, hence the lacerations. The two women have remained jailed since their arrest. Each is charged with 6 felony counts for aggravated child abuse. Yesterday, Franke pleaded guilty to abusing and starving 2 of her children.
Ms. Franke, how do you plead to count 1, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
Guilty.
To count 3, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
Guilty.
To count 5, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
Guilty.
And to count 6, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
With my deepest regret and sorrow for my family and my children, guilty.
Franke likely faces a prison sentence. She has 6 children, 4 of them are in state custody. As for her YouTube channel, it has been deactivated. The question is, how did it come to this? How did someone who preaches about parenting abuse her own children?
You've read it carefully?
The answer is simple. This world of influencing is like the wild, wild west. Laws are inadequate. Regulatory oversight is lacking, so disorder prevails. Anyone with a mobile phone and access to the internet can become an influencer, and once they do, money comes easily and frequently. There is a term for this. It is called the creator economy. It is powered by millions of people who are building and monetizing their own brand, selling products, advice, inspiration, attention, even fun to their followers. It may sound superficial, but this industry is projected to reach $480 billion by 2027, $480 billion. Of some 2,000 global brands, 80% use influencer marketing. And 54% youngsters say they would become influencers if they could. Seems almost euphoric, but it really isn't. There are loopholes here. Why are influencers saying what they are? Are they being paid to do so? Can you really trust what they say or do? No one knows. This man is called the Liver King. He's a shredded fitness influencer. He claims to eat raw organs to achieve this physique. But then he made a confession, admitting to taking more than $10,000 worth of steroids a month. Soon after, he was hit with a $25 million lawsuit for deception. Then you have Zahana Dart, a wellness influencer. She ate only raw vegan food and promoted the same. This year, she died of starvation, according to reports. And there are many such cases. Influencers peddle everything from Botox fillers to crypto wisecracks, but many don't believe what they say. They're simply promoting brands for money. Others don't have the right credentials to shell out advice. And sometimes, some of these people even kill themselves to get the views. In this influencer economy, anything goes. But who is holding them accountable? This year, America charged influencers for illegally promoting crypto. Australia investigated influencers over false ads. Italy sued a fashion influencer for misleading content. India released guidelines to curb finance and health influencers. And France became the first country to legally define what an influencer is. So basically, the action exists, but examples are few and far between. But what can we do about it? Well, I'm no influencer, but here's some advice. Until the action comes, even if it does, do your part, hold your influencers accountable, double-check their pearls of wisdom, establish your own guardrails and hold your influencers to higher standards. Because influencing is not going anywhere, so maybe it's time we make it a two-way street. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. As the world exchanges gifts this holiday season, world leaders are doing the same. Hungary's Orbán gave Erdogan a horse, while the Turkish president gifted him an electric car. In Argentina, fans celebrate a year of Messi's World Cup win with a giant mural in Buenos Aires. And looks like Spider-Man got some time off from fighting bad guys. He turned up at a Spanish hospital to visit some sick children. And finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1998, U.S. President Bill Clinton was impeached. He became the second U.S. president to be impeached. He was impeached for trying to cover up his affair with White House intern Monica Lewinsky. He was acquitted in 1999 after a Senate trial. We're leaving you on that note. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
House Calendar number 281. House Resolution 611 resolved that William Jefferson Clinton, President of the United States, is impeached for high crimes and misdemeanors.
To go on to high school. My family is proud of our dad for trying her best.
Efendim bu 4 yaşında bir aile.
İyi o yüzden. Good deal.
İyi iş, iyi anlaşma. Ticaret.
So President.
Sayın Cumhurbaşkanı.
Urias. Very decent.
A ver si se viene para este lado. A ver.